Okay, it's going right, folks. This is Sociology of Popular Culture, lecture number 7 on the 28th of October, 2021. Seems like just a week ago we were talking about dog tribe and fundamental. We're still going to talk about fundamental today, but we're launching into the more recent past, the 2000s, and one of the consequences of globalization, not really integrating the world, is that there was a war on terror. And we'll focus on that a little bit as part of politics of popular culture. So again, focusing on South Asian musicians and fundamental, their track DIY cookbook. But I want to contextualize this. As usual, there are so many ways to talk about, well, you know, one of the largest industries in the world is the weapons industry. I suppose I would start with the economic and see that massive investment is involved in the weapons industry. And I've talked about this often. But there's also different ways in which the need for a weapons industry and the jobs it creates and the sales and the massive profits and the corporate interests behind it present themselves in the world as a kind of ideology and as a form of racism. So that's sort of what today is about as well. Let me just give some very bare bones examples of this and how we've changed over time. Going in a circle, starting with the black and white photograph, we have a clip from, like a still from a movie from the 1920s or 30s. It's called The Yellow Alliance, and it's meant to stand for representations from 100 years ago in America, in Hollywood, of the dangerous Chinese, the yellow menace. Right? This is a very old trope that the menace, basically it's communism. This is the 1930s. I mean, you can see it in many films. One of my favorites is The Bitter Tea of General Yen. If you ever want to see a good example of that era's films, that's not so terrible for, I mean, the stereotypes are the Fu Manchu kind of Asian figure are awful. You can mock them, they're stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is you knock them down. They're like one of those balloons with sand at the bottom. You knock it down and it pops back up. There's this Asian or Chinese yellow peril kind of stereotype has been around for ages and ages. If someone could, I'm sure there's plenty of research done as to when it emerges and for how long it's been around in its different shapes and forms. But The Bitter Tea of General Yen is a Frank Capra film, and he's really interesting because he was also involved in World War II filming of ports of Asia, scouting for a position to help for the war effort later. Anyway, but in the 1930s, he made this film, The Bitter Tea of General Yen. Poison tea, right? Opium dens and communists, hordes running through the Civil War. It's all in the context of the 1927 revolution, failed revolution, uprising put down that Russia supported, Trotsky. And anyway, what was really notable about that film, and the reason I'm talking about it, is that Barbara Stanwyck, the great, fantastic actress, Barbara Stanwyck is in it. And it's worth watching just for her. One of her early roles, actually. Fantastic. But yeah, you know, the Chinese peril is, the communist enemy is of course relevant to Vietnam, and you know that. But it's also the Chinese, the Little Red Book and the Mao Zedong, and even the Maoists themselves, or the Chinese themselves, helped produce that representation of fanatical commitment to the idea of the cult of personality of Mao. Then I've got the playing card of Saddam in the middle, but let's go first to the guy with the muscles. You know who this is, right? These are the guys that lost the war. This is Rambo. But in the Hollywood remake, I didn't mean for that to happen. God, my slide's gone all over the shop. There it is, back to that. The Hollywood remake of the Vietnam War, in which the Americans win. Things turn out differently than happened in reality, right? So the stereotypes in this kind of filming, and I'd go so far as to go up to the sort of thing I was talking about in my other class on Tuesday, if you were in that, in Spike Lee's film, The Five Bloods. They're still refighting the Vietnam War, not the American War, and this time winning it and getting reparations for the black soldiers that were badly treated. Vietnamese don't get reparations. But that fear of communists is interesting. Now that America's refought the war, in Hollywood at least, and won, they needed a new enemy. And slowly through the 90s and into 2000s, they made Islam that enemy. You're probably just old enough to have grown up with the Saddam Hussein, knowing that Saddam Hussein is enemy number one, or at least Osama bin Laden was, but Saddam or Gaddafi, right? They had taken the place. The playing cards were handed out in Iraq after the 2003 invasion, right? You guys were kids, sure, but this pack of playing cards were handed out, and they were to try and track down these guys, the top 52 wanted generals and personalities from Saddam's government, which of course had been set up by the US originally to fight against Iran, and had just gone a little bit rogue, because thinking that Saddam thought he had permission from Bush Sr. to invade Kuwait, and then that approval disappeared. Of course, Saddam had no real connection to Osama bin Laden, but except that it was as an enemy of the US, of the Great Satan, it was a better-looking target for George Bush the Younger, George W. Bush, to attack than the already bombed to rubble Afghanistan, which had been invaded in 2001 after all. Anyway, the point is, the post-Cold War, the Cold War continued, but Stalin, Mao, Ho Chi Minh, as the bad guys for America, were replaced by Osama, Saddam, and Muhammad Gaddafi, the Lion of Libya, who led the Pan-African, contemporary African movement in favor of capital. I used to have a selection of all the photos of Gaddafi with different US and European leaders, but it's sort of a bit tragic to these figures, Stalin, Mao, Ho Chi Minh, or Osama, Saddam, Gaddafi, are stereotyped and turned into caricatures by the ideological effort of the US. And of course, any public figure can be demonized. And that's what I want to focus on today. How someone even so lowly as a singer in a pop band that you've already seen, Fundamental, Aki Nawaz, can be turned into a threat to all of humanity, it seemed. Even a musician or a performer, musicians who dare to say things that disrupt the polite, keep calm and carry on ideology of Britain, right? You know, this was Britain's slogan in World War II, right? They're being bombed, and the whole thing was British, indomitable spirit of the islander race who would just keep calm and carry on with business. And it became a slogan, and now sells T-shirts. And of course there are variations. Keep calm and read a book. Keep calm and make some tea. Keep calm and get your flu jab, or your COVID jab. The complacency or the normality of that, threatened by someone more critical than usually accepted, led you often to their demonization. Earlier as left-wing radicals, as communists of fellow travelers, or as rabid lefties, okay, and there's plenty of those stereotypes in the public domain up until the 80s. I mean, think of, I don't know, even comedy shows like The Young Ones and the Revolutionary. That anyway. Now, in the mid-90s, Asian musicians that had been absolutely celebrated and Asian cool had triumphed over the racism of British Little Britain nationalism, suddenly became dangerous again, because September 11th, some idiots flew some plane into the World Trade Center, smashing into the symbols of international capital. And we understand perhaps why they did it, but we don't understand why, or all of the impact of it, since it happened so curious in so many ways. The planes hitting the Twin Towers in New York seemed like, to many people, a bit of Hollywood. And that's why I think it really freaked people out, because it was different to the previous bombing attempt in the World Trade Center, for example, was a conventional bomb carried into the car park underneath, and they got caught and they were sent to court. It was mid-90s, and it didn't change the world. Whereas this one was so spectacular and in the style of Hollywood blockbuster cinema explosions, and Independence Day and the world and the Eiffel Tower being crushed, or all this stuff, the Pentagon, the White House destroyed in Independence Day in that film. That people said the world had changed. Of course, the world did change. America went USA, USA, and then promptly invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, and there's at least 100,000 lives lost because of those wars. Many, many more than the tragic death of 3,000 people in the September 11 event, but nonetheless, exponentially bigger payback. Anyway, by the by, I'm not talking about that today. That's a kind of context, not the only context, but that is the place in which the demonization of Akinawas was possible. And this is a picture of Akinawas in the days when he wore a kafir covering his face to get away from, I mean, face it, if you've seen photographs of him from earlier, he was quite the pretty lad when he was a drummer for the Bradford-based I've forgotten the name of the band. Just completely dropped from my mind. I've got the T-shirt. The Bradford-based band that he was a drummer for, yeah, he would. The reason I've forgotten is he's tried to become somewhat anonymous, covering his face in performances with the kafir. And it's a kind of rock and roll thing that belonged, or electronic music thing that belonged, or hip hop thing belonged to the time. There were several other musicians wearing masks at the time from his label, Nation Records, Transglobal Underground, for example, they would wear Nepali masks. There are other musicians that cover their faces or completely anonymous, perform behind a sheet, some DJs and so on. but that's not the whole story. The context is that Aki was always fundamental, always commenting on the politics of race relations in Britain. So fundamental, the name of the band gives it away, right? They were anticipating or recognizing the fear that had, or the anxiety that people had about fundamentalism, but they wanted to put the fun back into fundamentalism, right? But that was before Islam became the enemy of the world with the September 11th bombing and the July 7th, 2005 bombing in London, right? This was when you were young as well, so you may not remember this, but it was really shocking for Londoners that they awoke one morning to find all of the tube stations had been closed down, and 3 tube carriages had been blown up and a routemaster bus, leaving just 56 dead, which is not huge by any means, but the idea that this would happen in London, that there would be a symbol of London, the double-decker bus, red double-decker bus, photographed by Matthew Rosenberg in the photo we can see here, was really shocking, because the war on terror, which had been going on at this stage for 6 years or so, 5 years, for it to come to the centre of London was the disturbing thing. And I suppose that's why the Twin Towers was disturbing, because wars usually happened over there, far away, in faraway countries, and you had to make a big effort to get to. War never touched home. Vietnam was far away. Korea was far away. Grenada even. South America. These were not home incidents. Everyone could go about their business as usual, usually. And suddenly there were announcements at railway stations saying, don't leave your luggage alone, making everyone very paranoid and concerned. And the thing about terror attacks, the war on terror was always going to produce anxiety, because that's what the war on terror is designed to do. It became a part of popular culture. That's the weirdest thing. The popular culture in the West had to absorb the anxiety that the war might come to the streets right here and right now. And as we saw, it will blow the roof off buses. You could be traveling around London with your little pensioner pass, like I could get nowadays. If I had a London address, I could get a pensioner pass. And you can be sitting there minding your own business in the middle of London, where there are so many people, 10 million people or something, and the war could suddenly be there. It's like it hasn't been seen since World War II, when Germany threatened to bomb the city in the Blitz, and then with the Doodlebug, the V2 rocket, which would fly over from Germany, an unmanned rocket that would whistle in and blow up houses. And now the concern, the anxiety about the terror war was also technological. People were concerned about possibility of a dirty bomb, right? A nuclear weapon that was like made in a suitcase. It wasn't like the carefully refined and sophisticated bombs of the military, dropped from a great height and careful, a scientific instrument, but something more like or nail bombs, just IUDs, improvised IEDs, improvised explosive devices, the sort of thing that was happening in faraway Iraq or in faraway Afghanistan. But for it to happen in London freaked people out. And then that's why this 2005 bombing was so disturbing. And also that it came effectively out of nowhere. Well, there were security forces and people being careful, but the security forces seemed to have been taken by surprise. And that had happened a few times. There was a bomb in Barcelona. There was a bomb in Bali, where like tourists were bombed. So and the one in Barcelona. So cultural theorists tried to think about this as well. In his book, Violence, Slavoj Žižek wrote a whole book about violence, talking about terrorist attacks and suicide bombings as counter-violence. But it's interesting what he called them, right? He used a little French phrase. He called them a blind passage à l'acte, right? A blind, just an action portal where your young, crazed fanatics just blew something up out of frustration and anger. An implicit admission of impotence, he said. And I think that's really quite interesting that he calls it that. Can you see why? A blind passage à l'acte, or an implicit admission of impotence. To be impotent, to be blind with anger too. Well, who was impotent and who was blind that they had to attack Saddam Hussein rather than Osama bin Laden, who was in a cave in Africa somewhere. In Afghanistan somewhere. Well, we actually know where he was. It turned out he was in a very nice building, apartment complex in Abbottabad in Pakistan, but by the by. Another big, right, Slavoj Žižek is really big in culture studies. The Elvis of culture studies, they say. His work often is mentioned alongside the French philosopher Alain Badiou. I mean, Žižek and Badiou together sponsored conferences. They refer to each other's work. Badiou probably is the bigger thinker. Though Žižek wants to be up there, and his texts on Hegel are pretty impressive, pretty important. His book on violence, maybe not. And in a way, as the Elvis of culture studies, he needs to produce too many books to stay in the public eye, and people have lost enthusiasm for him. Badiou, however, because of his mathematics and philosophy, was able to do really deep, serious stuff, and then have some kind of commentary books, like here, a mad little book on Sarkozy, the French Prime Minister a few back. But in his essay on philosophy and the war on terror, which also had a piece by Jacques Derrida in it, writing about September 11th, Badiou says, it was an enormous murder, lengthily premeditated and yet silent. No one claimed responsibility. That's really interesting, that no one claimed responsibility. Well, we quickly accused some people, and they, Al-Qaeda did seem to claim responsibility, and there were reports that they found copies of the Quran in taxis, and although they seemed to disappear very quickly, I think that was hype. But very interesting. It was an enormous murder. Yeah, 3,000 people were murdered in that building, more than. So yeah, it was, and being in the business of counting deaths, then measuring 100,000 killed in Iraq War, it's not an equation. But it was an enormous murder, and it was premeditated. They planned it. These 19 attackers on the 4 planes. Sorry, 3 planes. 4 planes. Yeah, 4 planes. 1 crash landed in a field, 2 hit buildings in New York, and 1 hit the Pentagon. I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories and say, well, it was an inside job and so on. Entertain yourself for hours looking at that stuff. There's no nothing to be said about it, really. But interesting to look at exactly what Badiou was saying. One of our leading philosophers, he would say. I mean, he calls himself the last Maoist in France. So I think that's a bit hard to believe. But certainly one of the most respected philosophers saying it was an enormous murder. Okay. everyone has to condemn it. Sure, I condemn it. Lengthily premeditated and yet silent. That's really interesting. No one claimed responsibility. This is in his book Polemics. Zizek has chosen infirmities to describe the suicide bomber: blind, impotent, and Badiou has said they're silent. No one claimed responsibility. They're not the only ones to say this kind of thing. Susan Bach-Morse, whose book on Walter Benjamin's Arcades project is great, who wrote stuff on the Frankfurt School and Adorno, right, a scholar of Adorno, also said the destruction of September 11 was a mute act. That's like silence, right? Like Badiou saying it's silence. And she said this before. It was a mute act. They left no note behind. She repeats, the attackers perished without making demands. No one left a note behind. It was a mute act. Now, they attacked the tallest buildings in New York that stood the World Trade Financial Center. So their hatred of America, of Great Satan as it's called, and of everything it stands for, and frustration because they're on the other side of the world being oppressed by imperialism, at the heart of the financial district in the largest or the greatest city in America, etc., they hit the Twin Towers. Do they need to leave a note saying, oh, by the way, we did this because we hate you? I mean, it's pretty clear already, isn't it, that they attacked the center of capitalism. They attacked the symbol of money, of what they thought was evil capital. Did they have to make demands? It's like, we are against capital. Bang, they blew up the central image, the home base. Capital. So calling it a mute act, putting it in the category of impotence or blindness, unable to express any virulence, strikes me as wrong, as we should expect more from our greatest social theorists, our greatest cultural studies scholars. They should be able to explain what was going on more than say, oh, they've just got psychological problems. And something else was going on there, something more. I mean, Buckmore's at least qualifies this mute act kind of stuff by asking the question, or did they? Maybe they left a non-verbal message. Maybe, you're kidding me? Yes, they did. And even pop musicians were able to see that. It was a singular event in some senses, and not in the sense that because it was like Hollywood, it changed the world, but because actually even our theorists didn't know what to say or do about it. They were like, fell very quickly into absolutely cliched and even, I think, dumb responses, inadequate. I've called them elsewhere pantomime. I mean, this was everywhere. Even okay. There were. Forget about this thing about the dissent for a minute. The Hasib Mirzain is said to be the bus bomber, where he was 50 minutes late to hit this bus, right? I mean, the 3 tubes, this is in the London bombing in 2005. The 3 tube trains were hit at, say, whatever time it was, 9 o'clock in the morning. It was 50 minutes later when the bus blew up. Right, and so some cultural theorists like Vic Seidler, a sociologist at Goldsmiths, my old college, He said that this was unplanned, right? That was an accidental. How do you accidentally blow up a bus, right? But what he means is that the four of them agreed together to blow up the tube, but one of them chickened out, and then he was going home and he was trying to defuse his bomb when it went off on the bus. Maybe, but wow, what an image we have! This photograph of the bus. Actually, you don't often see this view of the bus. Usually you see a front-on view of the bus. And I think one of the things I try and teach is how to read photographs, right? And reading that photograph is something. Because really, beside what Vig Seidler says, beside what Bach Moores says, and Zizek and Badiou, there's something to be said about the images as they appear in popular culture that's significant. And that's that this image of the bus is Jacques Derrida calls it pervertible. The images, they're made to say what we want them to say, right? So by introducing his interpretation, Vig Seidler says that this was an accident, that the bomber was defusing the bomb. So that's why, all right, but pervertible characterization of the bus bomb can go two ways. What if, given that the terrorists had a very high desire to be seen to have struck at Satan, right? The equivalent of hitting the Twin Towers was hitting the center of London. They wanted to be highly visible. Blowing up a train in the underground was symbolic, but didn't have good TV. Blowing up a red bus, the symbol of London, the images could be made to speak. And if we read the side of the bus, right, have you learnt to read images yet? We need to actually literally read what it says on the bus. I mean, it's a number 34 bus. It's going to Victoria. I don't know where it's headed to. And then it says, can you read what's on the side there? It says it's the film, the Descent, advertising for a film on the side of the bus. Did the bomber, Mir Hussein, know that he was going to target a specific bus to get on the media and say, outright terror, bold and brilliant, total film? That's what it says on the side of the bus. Now, right? Total film. This is pervertibility of the image. That's getting the image to say what you want it to say. 50 minutes after the tube has been blown up, a bus is blown up that says it's just terror. Well, it might be that we're ascribing intentionality to the bombers where there isn't any justification. Right? It might be this is another conspiracy theory. And well, whatever the consequences for other Muslims after the bombing was terrible, and that's probably what matters more than pointing out the actual, or the imagined reasoning behind Mir Hussein. Although they did leave video messages afterwards, so they're not completely mute. Not completely blind as well. They can make a statement in the media, so to speak. The only trouble with the suicide bomber as trying to work out what they were thinking at the time is that they're not around to be interviewed. If they're successful, they're not available. right? An unsuccessful suicide, yeah, you can talk to them afterwards and find out what's going on. But a suicide bomber is just, this is Gayatri Spirak's point, they're not available to explain whether or not they had a list of demands or why they chose that particular bus or that particular building. We can work out, surely we can work out a little bit why they chose the red bus symbol of London, right? Anyway, the point is just, why doesn't anyone read the side of the bus? Read what's written on the bus. Read the image, literally read the image, and wonder about this. Because the image, this image of the side-on bus disappeared from the press, and we more often saw a front-on one. It didn't have the people in it who'd been upstairs going in shock. And it didn't have this, that you couldn't identify the image on the side of the bus. In fact, my picture of the image on the side of the bus is from a couple of days later. Actually, that bus was still wandering around, although they pulled the film. The film, called The Descent, is a story of some kids that go down into a cave and a monster picks them off one by one. And you know, that's kind of bizarre. But it's not what I want to talk about today only, but that's part of the context. Interpreting cinema, interpreting images, interpreting what's happening in popular culture in the context of politics and the terror war that existed and kind of still continues, although the term itself has been retired. I think it was Obama who said, we're not going to call it the war on terror anymore. It's related to that, but just as context for talking about Aki Nawaz and a track from that band. So to put that in the context, right? So that's the background. Now, in June 2006, the Guardian newspaper, which is likes to think of itself as a left-wing newspaper, it's not, but it likes to think so, it found a fairly crazy headline to put above a slightly modified press release from Nation Records, that put out Fundamentals albums, putting out a new Fundamental album called Erotic Terrorism, right? And this album, this headline, the album's about to come out, right? The headline of the newspaper over a picture of Aki Nawaz accused Aki Nawaz of terrorist sympathies because he'd written a song about Osama bin Laden, and they said he was they called him a suicide rapper. Suicide bomb rap was the headline, right? And in the parliament, actually, two British parliamentarians called Aki Nawaz a suicide rapper. So what they mean is he's like a suicide bomber, but he does it in music. And that struck me as really interesting, really weird. How would somebody who makes art, right, just an artist, be put into the same category as the crazy people that blew up the tube, blew up the World Towers, blew up the bus, blew up Barcelona, blew up, right? Can a song be like a bomb, right? Besides saying, oh, it's the bomb, or like in a obviously fun metaphoric way, this was the headline of a serious newspaper. And then the tabloids took it up, the Sun took it up the next day, and it got into the parliament and so on. I find it almost incomprehensible. So that's why I want to spend some time trying to work out what was going on. There was a photograph that came along with the article. And I think this is the photograph. So the Sun had branded Aki Nawaz a suicide rapper, and Guardian had published this photograph. And I want you to look at the photograph and describe it to me. Seriously, like in terms of reading an image, What things come to your notice here? Anyone? He's ready to put his hands up for a fight, says Dan. He is ready. Well, his hands are in his pocket. Yeah, but maybe. That's interesting. Yeah. Okay, what else? There's lots of things to be said about this, so we can go on and on. I do want to spend time with it. Everyone should say one thing about this photo. Unless you've already been in my class before. So I see one of you at least has. So probably sat through this discussion already once. What's significant about this photograph? The photograph's taken by Martin Godwin. Itself an interesting name. Martin Market. Looks like, Charles says, looks like he's trying to cause trouble. Really? Hands in his pocket? Okay, maybe. Yeah, he's got that punk rock snarly face look down, hasn't he? I can't do it. But all right, everyone to the cameras, turn on and frown at the camera. No, he's definitely got that. What else? Let's break down the elements of the photo. What do you see? He looks so scary and maybe ready to make a battle. Really? Okay. What makes you think that? I mean, he is really peaceful guy. Really a peaceful guy. What makes you think, what is it? Yeah, I think Long is trying to look cool. Definitely trying to look cool. I mean, the man is Southern Death Cult was the name of the band that he used to be in as the drummer. Southern Death Cult. Memory. But yeah, he's trying to look cool, and I would say he's cornered that market long ago. And Dong says, an Italian walking on England's sidewalk. That's interesting. You think he's Italian, but yeah, the guy behind looked like he's got his back. The guys behind look like got his back. I'm not sure what you mean, Nock. I think he's creating distance. No one wants to get close. Okay. So the Italian thing, he's not Italian, he's Pakistani, but nonetheless, he is wearing a shirt that's from Italy, right? Roma. That's the name of a football club. This is a football shirt. For the left-wing football club. There are two main football clubs in Rome. What else? I mean, the football club thing is it's not just Roma, right? It's the Roma people that is it's not just Rome, the city. He might be wearing that. He might think it's also cool to wear a shirt that says Roma, because that's the indigenous name or a name for what racists call gypsy people, the travelers, who are also suffer a lot of prejudice in the UK. And you know, the Roma is the left-wing club, a bit like Celtic is in Scotland, and Rangers is the right-wing club. Well, in Rome, it would be Lazio. It would be the right-wing club. And, you know, football footballer. This is at the time, 2006. You've probably not done the math or not know to do the maths, but it's when the World Cup was on. All right, so wearing a football shirt is timely. And also, do you see on the my right-hand side of the picture, there's the St. George flag. That's not up there because it's the flag of English nationalism, although it is. It's the flag of right-wing English nationalism, although they also like the Union Jack. It's the English football team flag, right? Which is up because England were in the competition. They didn't do very well, as usual, but they were there. What else do you see that's unusual or worthy of comment? Other clothing? So he's wearing a coiffier scarf, something like this thing, but not the same as that. But he's wearing, you remember the other picture of him earlier. Let me find it. Where he's wearing the coiffier here, he's wearing it covering his face as part, as I explained, it was part of his philosophy to hide his, then when he was younger, quite pretty face, to get rid of ego, to be a bit anonymous, to be a bit more menacing perhaps. He's moved that scarf from his face, covering his face, up to his head. But actually, usually people wear the coiffier around their neck. So, well, that's what, in London anyway, they wear this scarf around their neck. The Socialist Workers Brigade and so on. The coiffier were worn by Arabs, Palestinians, in the Middle East is worn on the head, but not in this same way. He's wearing it more like a headscarf. It's not a typical hat of an Italian. No, it's a good question to ask. It's a Palestinian coiffier. I'll have to spell it out for you in the chat. Hang on. Coiffier. So it's a big square check scarf with a fringe all around, and it's worn usually in a kind of triangle down the back as the headwear of Palestinians, or different Arabs have different color ones. So you can get red and green and red and green ones. Red, green, white one is also Palestinian, but they mean different things. They mean different affiliations, tribal affiliations, or so on. But also in the context of the war on terror, which was very much in the media at this time, what the Pakistani or the South Asian community in London were very aware of and very scared about was that Americans, after September 11th, went out in places like Arizona and they found Sikhs who had wore turbans, a completely different religion to Osama bin Laden and the Arabs, but nonetheless wearing a headscarf, and killed them. So 2 Sikhs were killed in the days after September 11th. They were killed in attacks, one in Arizona, one somewhere else. I don't remember where. And there's a real sense that there was a racist profiling of the people that did these terror attacks are different to us, and we can identify them. They're the ones wearing those headscarves. Even though Sikhs wore headscarves as well. Palestinians wore headscarves and were very different to Osama bin Laden and so on. So the scarf that, and the left-wing support for Palestine, which used to be worn as a scarf around the neck, then had gone on to his face during the 90s in his activism, and now became a headscarf. And he's wearing that, I think, in some kind of solidarity, right? And anyone who knows what that scarf is will read it and say, oh, he's wearing that, right? That'll be a part of the story. I think this is also July 2006. So it's exactly 1 year after this, right? After this. It's the anniversary of this. And so in the photograph, which is produced by Martin Godwin, we've got the football on the one side and the bus and a backpack on the other. Remember, it was a backpack. The bomber had a bomb in a backpack. And it was still pretty unusual in London to see anyone with a backpack, let alone in a photograph in the front of the newspaper. This guy here in blue with the tracksuit and I think a lead for a dog, but it's covered up, a British bulldog maybe. He does look like a typical British Chelsea supporting racist, right? Maybe, I don't know. The others, these are just usual London commuters, I reckon. It looks like Ladbroke Grove. You can tell from the railway station, the bridge across the railway station there. The number 57 or 52 bus, I don't know. Yeah, I can't read where it's going. Aldwych, yes, it's going to Aldwych, which is pretty central near Fleet Street and so on, and probably going from West London, where the Aki's office was. So in a way, this photograph has been composed to say a few things by Andrew Goodwin. It's not just a publicity shot of a punk rocker looking a bit angry. He's chosen what he's wearing, a left-wing football shirt in the middle of the football festival of the World Cup. He's put his scarf, which is usually lower, around his head in a kind of solidarity with those that are being persecuted since September 11th. On the one side, there's football fans and their bulldog, or I don't know whether that little caption thing is covering up a dog or not, but could be, and the English flag. And on the other side, the bus and the backpack. The image tells a story, and this guy is the suicide rapper, right? Wow, yeah. Against this, of course, the Asians themselves came out and said, no, we need to make new kinds of creative alliances and not buy into this crap from the newspaper saying suicide rapper and that. And Aki himself pointed out that Gandhi was not alone. There were always others involved. And he refers to Udham Singh and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and so on. And then, well, it made me interested in how suicide bombers appear, or people accused of suicide rap or terror rap were entering into popular culture. David Watts is a member of Fundamental, and he said he could really understand why people became suicide bombers, like out of frustration with this whole system. And making, he understood, it doesn't mean he would go and do it, but he said, we do need to understand these people are not just blind, impotent. Well, maybe they're impotent, but they're not without reason. They've been bashing their head against the wall of racism for so long that, and hypocrisy, that they go out and do something completely crazy. And this frustration needs to be analyzed and understood, not pathologized, not made into blind passage as an actor, or impotence made into a throwaway analysis, but really to be examined and understood. And examined in the context of that frustration and that frustration at the hypocrisy of the West. So they make this video called Cookbook DIY and try and explain their perspective. And it's really interesting that they do this, because I think they go further in the video in explaining the background to why these youth of Britain blew up the trains and the bus than the cultural theorists all the cultural theorists can with their talk of media and event and impotence and muteness. This DIY cookbook song is in 3 parts, right? So there's a person who, in frustration, because there's no other avenue for expression, just takes out a symbol of everything he hates with a $50 bomb that he makes at home, right? The second verse is a bit more nuanced. There's a guy who's that angry, but instead of just going out and wrecking something, he learns his skills, he goes to university, he finds out about sophisticated materials and makes the dirty bomb that really does produce a sophisticated terror attack, right, that threatens a whole city. But neither of these are as obscene as a scientist working in the Pentagon in a lab that makes a neutron bomb that can wipe out a whole city. The neutron bomb doesn't wipe out the buildings, it just melts the science of it is incredible. It melts body fat in people. The neutron explosion is of a nature. It doesn't destroy buildings, it just melts the people inside. How horrific that is. And on a scale of horror, all 3 are bad, no doubt. But in a world where the third, the most grotesque, the neutron bomb that kills all the people but leaves the buildings okay, is really the most obscene. Yeah. Which means I should probably show the video, right? Now that I've set it up, so you want to see these 3 parts, I suspect, right? So let me do that. Now I hope. Oh, come on, spare me. All right, wasn't opening for a second there. All right, make it bigger. Go back to the start. Make sure the volume's up loud. Come on, we need it loud. And share. All right, let me know if you can't hear this, but I think you will be able to. Let me just see. All right, you see a color splurge. Right, I'm going to hit play and then come back and hopefully it works.
Up ingredients stacked up my laptop, downloaded that military cookbook PDF. Elements, everyday chemicals at my reach. Household bleach to extract the potassium chlorate. Boiling on a hot plate with hate, recipe for disaster. Plastic bomb blaster, I mix some high pumps wax to Vaseline. Slowly dissolving gasoline. Add to potassium in a large metal bowl. Heat like dough, so it rebuilds slow. Gasoline evaporates, cool dry in place. I'm strapped up across my chest, but belt attached. Deeply satisfied with the plan I hatch. Electrodes connected to a gas cooker lighter. Switching my the situation demands self-sacrifice, getting back advice with a £50 price. The hurt is gone, gonna build a dirty bomb. Use the spirit of religion, education. My PhD will free me. Paid off currencies and weapons, great ready. Taught myself social Pakistan, the grand band of crazy. It says to up the plan, rage. Fell on me, the next engaged. Sold by the cages from my base in Georgia. I get some competition from my to-be radiator. So easy to sell the infidels to their career. It takes a dirty mind to build a dirty bomb. Simplicity dummy, genius is dummy. Down the situation to a manageable level. To make the road impossible to live for these devils. The suitcase accepted, I pull my phone trigger. Blow them out to hell for $1 million figure. I insist, I'm a legitimate scientist, paid by the government with your finances. I got a private room in the White House suite, so I can love this presidential beef. The Megatron, John Dolph, war veteran, foremost proponent of the neutron bomb. At the center, the atomic, smiling on all sides, wrapped in layers of lithium deuteride. The bomb detonates, causing lithium to fission into helium, tritium, drugs into fission. The blast causes shockwaves that melt body fat. You need me though, then leave the buildings intact. I made it a 25 mega bomb daily cover. A great blast radius with very little cover. There's less radiation, so you get a cleaner bomb. Sure mind people, because the billion now.
First, I thought this was a scary video and sound horror clip. Well, it's Halloween, right? So this is my Halloween video for you. But yeah, a bit scary because it really is terror we're talking about, right? That's the topic. And let's go through it. Because, yeah, I think there's a lot to be unpacked. So it starts with it ends with a quote. All the way through, this guy in the orange jumpsuit, which you'll know is the suit that the prisoners in Guantanamo wear, has been painting this slogan: if we make peaceful revolution impossible, we make violent revolution inevitable. JFK. What does JFK stand for? John F. Kennedy. All right. But why does anti-racist activists know John F. Kennedy? I'll show you later. It comes from a quote from Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King quoting JFK when he's talking about Vietnam. JFK, just before he's assassinated, he gives a speech at the Riverside Church in New York. And there he quotes this and says, in the context of the student protests against the Vietnam War, that America needs to rethink its involvement in Vietnam and get out of Vietnam. And this is why the students are fighting. And if we make peaceful revolution impossible, hippies and all of that wanted peaceful revolution, that will make violent revolution inevitable. And the whole project of being in Vietnam will be reversed, right? So it's Martin Luther King's speech where he comes out against the war in Vietnam that is being quoted here. But let's go back further to the start, because there is some funny bunny stuff. It starts with this picture of is it a bunny rabbit? But terribly up close. And cut with an image of a man wearing the English football shirt, or at least a homemade version of it. You wouldn't remember at the time, but there was publicity with the striker, the English striker called, I don't know, he famously had to have his hair grown back. David Rooney? No, Rooney. What's Rooney's first name? Anyway, He was photographed in the position of Jesus Christ, but with the red cross on his painted on him, right? That was a famous publicity photo. So this English flag for the football, which is the symbol of the racists, was also the symbol of the nation coming together to try and, win the footy, right? You know how that can happen some days when the flag is just all over the city, and so it's an emblem of that, but intercut with this a bit scary stuff with the bunny. The cute bunny, symbol of everything cute ever, all kids' little toys and so on, but made a bit scary by the color, and also associated with this thing with the eyeball. What's that? A kind of lizard. No, it's the bunny's eye. Oh, no, it's a lizard eye. A dinosaur, toy dinosaur. That's it. And the guy painting this symbol. What is this green stuff? Yeah, it's this dinosaur mask, basically. Ah, yes, he's got a crocodile or dinosaur head mask. And the lyrics are already going there. I'm packed up. If I can get more of that in. Packed up ingredients, stacked up my laptop. Right, downloaded the military cookbook, PDF. The military cookbook was an anarchist, updated version of the anarchist cookbook, which taught you how to make petrol bombs and so on. This one teaches you how to make a backpack bomb, right? So this is your young English kid, but he's turned into a crocodile or a lizard. Right? He's no longer just into bunnies and cute animals, but he's mixed his interest in growing up in England, but he's also become a bunny turned into a lizard, turned into a young Asian kid making a bomb from his laptop at home alone. Right? Everyday elements, he's got some chemicals and put them together from his house and learned how to do it, boiled it at home. Recipe for disaster, plastic bomb blaster, Vaseline, gasoline. Now he's got a zebra head. Here's the bunny head. This is a bit scary, this bunny, right? But then the bunny that's scary is everyday life. Kids, cute bunny turns into, it's like the clown that turned into a terror figure as well. Strapped across my chest with the bomb belt attached. He's got a cooker lighter, and then end of verse. Then there's what looks to me like Barbie in chains. In between the verses, you get a few images and open to interpretation what you think about what's going on here. Why is Barbie, the doll, tied up? What kind of fantasy world is that? Anyway, the next guy in the second verse, after we get some more writing of the slogan, oh, what's that? Is that Barbie still, or is that... Oh, Ken is also tied up. Barbie and Ken were never a good match, were they? Second verse. This is the guy who's a scholar, right? He's... a bit more like the more demonic level, right? And his lyrics, I'm 31, numb, but the hurt is gone. He's been fighting for a long time, for years, but he's now decided his only way forward is to make a dirty bomb. He used the privilege of his education that his parents probably pushed really hard to get him into uni to do. And he's done a PhD, but he's able to now use this PhD in chemicals or whatever, and then go and buy some weapons-grade uranium from the Russians, learn some skills from Pakistan and Iran, upgrade to stage 2 of the plan. Well, this guy, he's got an AK-47 or Armalite, I think, around his neck. He's got the classic what is this? Zapata from the Mexican revolutionaries or something, a band of bullets crossed up, proper revolutionary, serious stuff. A bit of a joke, really, but t-shirt off, balaclava on, anonymous, is involved with the Chechens in Georgia, right? The revolution again, the movement, the nationalist movement against the Russian Federation. Got some cobalt 60 from a food irradiator and sends the infidels to his creator. Takes a dirty mind to build a dirty bomb. Simplicity is numbing. Genius is dumbing down the situation to a manageable level to make the world impossible to live for these devils. A suitcase of Semtex, mobile phone trigger, blow them all to hell for $1 million figure. This guy here in the hoodie is the author of the text. Back to the interlude, more painting on the poster and more kids' toys. This time, I don't know who that is. Ken being run over by a car. I don't know what these are. Toy bondage or something. Now, the third verse takes it up yet another level. I insist on a legitimate scientist paid by the government with your finances. Right, the symbol there is the state flag of Utah and Chrysler image, right, corporate and government, and the United Nations flag. There's scientists working for the United Nations. He's got a White House suite developed according to presidential beef. The toys are there on the desk with him. So there they are. All right, so here's a Gulf War veteran, proponent of the nuclear bomb. Oh, and dressed like, what's this? Dressed like the Ku Klux Klan. The United Nations and the Ku Klux Klan, it turns out there were overlaps between some of the people in government and the great high church of the Ku Klux Klan. And this businessman in his gas mask, talking about a neutron bomb, helium, titanium neutrons into fission. The blast causes shock waves that melt body fat. Unfortunately, though, uniquely though, it leaves the buildings intact. He made the 25 megaton daisy cutter. This is the bomb that was used to try and flush Osama bin Laden out of the caves in Pakistan, the daisy cutter. 25 megaton, a huge area would be flattened by this bomb. And this has been made according to White House brief. And it's not got that much radiation, so it's cleaner. It's your money, people. It's done by tax money, taxpayers' money. Cost $1 billion to develop this terrible bomb that's 1,000 times worse than the bomb made for $50 by the kids. More cartoony things. This guy's nightmare, and then JFK. So the message of it kind of lives. The chapters, each of the chapters, illustrate the JFK point and make it too frustrating for protesters to find an expression of their frustration. You end up with inevitable violence. So for this message, which is a legitimate, I'd say a legitimate attempt to get across a point of view on the situation with some nice melody. Aki Nawaz is accused in the Parliament building of being a suicide rapper. I mean, it's pretty clear that they only, if at all, they listen to the first chapter, right? And it's, oh my God, they've made a film of how to make a bomb. Not they made a video of how to make a bomb. Not, hey, they've made a video where they show that these kids making bombs are not any different to the older grown-ups making bombs for $1 billion. All three are terrible. All three are insane. That's kind of what I see them as saying. But they didn't wait for that. They just went to the point of, this is just a recommendation. As if art, right, which is what this is, art has to be like a positive role model all the time, rather than make you uncomfortable, make you think about something, right? It's not an endorsement. The band are not endorsing blowing things up. They're saying we need to understand why people blow things up. In this environment, youth frustrated are blowing things up because they see the government blowing Islamic countries up with daisy cutters, developing these horrific weapons of mass destruction, invading countries, taking down whole governments, right? And we're also frustrated. In that context, you can understand. It doesn't mean you approve. You can understand why this kind of thing happens, rather than say like Zizek and Lane Badju and Buck Moores and Vic Seidler did, saying they've got no message, they're mute, they're blind, they're impotent. Not at all. They're not impotent. They're misguided, that's for sure. But they didn't just like react. I mean, Zizek elsewhere compares them to the youth that were competing with each other to see who could get their car burning car at night in the Paris suburbs onto the TV news. They just go out for fun that night. These were not kids going out just for a bit of fun. They were committed to a cause, an ideology. Yeah, twisted as it was, it's not simply blind, simply mute. Right? And that was the whole intent of trying to unpack what was at stake in this video. But government instead calls it suicide rap, and the album is banned. It can't be released. The record company, the parent record company, refuses to allow it to go out. It doesn't get any airplay. It's buried under, I suppose, the demonization of Islam and the paranoid response to the theme of the suicide bomber. So here, right, so politics and the impoverishment of popular culture converge. And the slogan from Kennedy, made in the White House in 1962, is picked up by Martin Luther King in this speech. Right? Martin Luther King speaking at New York Riverside Church in April the 4th, 1967, on the topic of the war of Southeast Asia, insists on an end to all bombing and recognition of the Vietnamese National Liberation Front, calls for acts of atonement for our sins and errors in Vietnam. And he says, in 1957, a sensitive American official overseas said it seemed to him that our nation was on the wrong side of a world revolution. During the past 10 years, we have seen the emergence of a pattern of suppression which has justified the presence of the US military advisors in Venezuela. This need to maintain social stability for our investment accounts, for the counter-revolutionary action of American forces in Guatemala. It tells why American helicopters are being used against guerrillas in Colombia, the war on drugs, right? And why American napalm and Green Beret forces have already been active against the rebels in Peru, the Shining Path. It's with such activity in mind that the words of the late John F. Kennedy come back to haunt us. 5 years ago, he said, remember he was assassinated, those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. increasingly by choice or by accident. This is the role of our nation, that our nation has taken. The role of those who make peaceful revolution impossible by refusing to give up the privileges and pleasures that come from the immense profits of overseas investment. He means the war industry, the weapons industry, or the industries that supply the forces that occupy everything from Iraq and Afghanistan to wherever next. They bombed NATO, they bombed NATO bombing of Libya, that turned Syria into rubble, that put restrainers on kids and families, and paper bags on people's heads and put them in trucks. All right, I'll stop here for now and we'll have a break. Questions, welcome, of course. Let's take 5 minutes.